This is the third part in a four-part series on the evolution of human communication. Part 1 started with early human nonverbal communication and ended with complex oral cultures. Part 2 began with the rise of writing systems and ended with the manuscript era, just before the major expansion of print culture. This video, the third epoch, begins with the print revolution around 1450 and ends around 1980, just before the rise of the digital era. We are looking at the age of mass communication and industrialization. It is a period when communication becomes faster, cheaper, more reproducible, more visually oriented, more commercial. It's a world where global media industries have massive influence over the content of everyday life. Communication evolution brought symbol exchange, speech, writing, law, philosophy, religion, literature, and bureaucracy. But from roughly 1450 to 1980, communication became mass communication. Messages began to truly break the bonds of storyteller memory, transcend the scribbles of the scribe, and extend far beyond the space-time of the messengers that made them. Messages began to be mass-printed, photographed, broadcast, recorded, copied, circulated, sold, and consumed by audiences who would otherwise never have known the message maker even existed. The first major turning point is print, which is commonly cited around 1450 or 1455 with the invention of the printing press and the publication of the Gutenberg Bible. Importantly, printing itself did not begin with Gutenberg. Earlier forms existed in Asia in the form of woodblock printing and movable type. Gutenberg's press became historically decisive in Europe because it combined movable metal type, ink, paper, and press technology in a way that supported large-scale book production. The new technology did not immediately democratize knowledge. Books weren't cheap. Political and religious authorities remained entirely in control of knowledge production and exchange. Most people still saw little benefit in literacy. Yet print undeniably changed the scale and stability of communication, setting the stage for mass literacy campaigns in the future. Print also impacted authority in a variety of ways. Of course, those in control of media production inevitably hold most of the power. Yet, when you increase the number and vary the nature of people who encounter, debate, and compare messages, information becomes easier to contest and critique. Thus, with the increase in literacy over time, religious authority, scientific authority, and political authority all became vulnerable to new forms of public discourse. By the 17th and 18th centuries, newspapers and periodicals became increasingly normalized and with interesting effects. People who never actually met one another began to imagine themselves as members of a shared political and social world because they were reading about the same issues, the same wars, scandals, elections, markets, ideas, etc. One communication theorist named Jürgen Habermas was interested in public spaces where private people would come together to discuss matters of common concern. These spaces can be just about anything: coffee houses, salons, churches, but also newspapers, journals, and pamphlets. He called these spaces the public sphere. And though still vulnerable to disproportionate representation due to long-standing social conventions like racism, classism, and sexism, the addition of printed and mass-distributed messages helps explain how modern politics became intrinsically tied to mediated discussions. Then came the ability to send messages through the power of electricity. For most of human history, long-distance communication could not move faster than a person, a horse, or a ship. That changed in the 19th century with the electric telegraph. The telegraph, developed and expanded in the 1830s and 1840s, allowed messages to travel across great distances almost instantly. Communication scholar James Carey argued that the telegraph transformed communication by reorganizing time and space. Information could move faster than bodies, goods, armies, and markets. Knowledge could be coordinated across regions. The telephone gave speed to human voice, making long-distance interpersonal communication feel more intimate and immediate. Though the technology could not replace face-to-face interactions, it vastly changed the meaning of distance. A family member could be absent and still feel socially present through voice. Visual communication was also experiencing a paradigm shift. In the early 1800s, photography was invented, a technology that revolutionized communication by offering a new form of visual evidence. A photograph appeared to say, "This existed," or "This happened," or "This person was here." Like all media, photographs are not neutral. They are framed, selected, cropped, captioned, circulated, and interpreted. But photography became and persists as a very convincing form of communication. It changed and continues to change journalism, science, memory, administration, reporting, and much more. As the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Philosopher and art critic Roland Barthes said photography was emotionally powerful because it connects presence and absence. A photograph shows someone or something that was once there but may no longer be, converging the past and the present. Photography preserves and transfers, for better or worse, static visual memory. By the late 19th century, cinema began to add motion to visual communication. Film combined photography, movement, performance, narrative, spectacle, and eventually sound. Cinema reorganized collective attention. It became increasingly normal for groups of strangers to gather together in theaters to watch the same moving images. Film created new kinds of pop stars, new genres of art, new audiences and consumers, and became material for shared cultural references. It also created or substantially changed forms of persuasion through documentaries, propaganda, newsreels, political film, advertising, and more. Walter Benjamin, in The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, argued that technologies like photography and film changed the status of art. A painting has an original presence, one that is generally valued more than its reprints. A film or photograph can be reproduced many times, and in most cases, without losing any of its artistic value. Whatever the implications of these new technologies, the 20th century further intensified them through the rise of radio and television. Radio became a major mass medium, with commercial broadcasting expanding exponentially beginning around the 1920s. Radio was so powerful because it brought public voices into private spaces. A political speech, sports event, news bulletin, or artistic performance could now be deployed in real time to audiences separated by vast distances. Radio created national audiences and a sense of communal, shared listening while simultaneously giving individual listeners the sense that they were receiving messages more directly from the source. The power of deploying mass messages through technologies like radio and television is that they can create what some describe as intimacy at a distance. It's no wonder then that radio became a core technology for politics and propaganda. FDR's fireside chats used radio to cultivate a sense of direct connection with the American public. Radio was also widely used for authoritarian propaganda, wartime messaging, and nationalist mobilization. During this time, communication scholars became increasingly interested in media effects and agenda. Harold Laswell famously summarized communication analysis with the question, who says what, in which channel, to whom, and with what effect? He used the metaphor of a hypodermic needle to explain how electric communication could inject information into the minds of audiences. But later, scholars challenged the simplicity of early media effects assumptions. The two-step flow of communication suggested that media did not simply inject ideas into passive audiences. Rather, interpretations of mediated messages are filtered through cultural beliefs, community norms, and influencer opinions. Television was not integrated as quickly as radio. The technology existed experimentally for decades before TV devices became standard household appliances in the 1950s. Television combined sound, image, domestic space, entertainment, advertising, journalism, politics, and live broadcasting, making messages more immersive than radio or print journalism ever could. Like its technological predecessors, television changed politics. Candidates suddenly had to perform visually. Public events became national visual spectacles. The Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, presidential debates, moon landings, assassinations, protests, and disasters all entered living rooms as shared visual experiences. Television also changed advertising and consumer culture. Commercial messages became woven into entertainment. Brands did not merely describe products, but began to wrap them in visual and curated lifestyles, identities, desires, and feelings, ushering in theretofore unimaginable manifestations of mass consumer culture. Critical theorists like Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno worried that mass-produced culture could standardize consumer consciousness, training audiences to expect and prefer base-level, uninspired, and predictable entertainment. Their culture industry theory remains important because it asks whether mass media expand democratic culture or flatten it into commercial repetition, subjugating individuals to their base desires of greed, consumption, and gratification. Marshall McLuhan offered a different but equally important way to think about communication technology. His argument that the medium is the message draws attention to the fact that the type of medium a message travels through changes the conditions of individual perception and shifts the norms of social organization and human interaction. Print, radio, television, and later digital media did not just change the way messages were transmitted. They reshaped the entire physical and psychological worlds of communication and sense-making. By the 1960s and 1970s, media studies became increasingly attentive to ideology, representation, race, gender, class, and power. Stuart Hall's encoding-decoding model remains particularly important for communication research. Hall argued that media producers encode preferred meanings into texts, but that audiences do not simply absorb those meanings. Rather, audiences decode messages from particular social positions. They may accept the preferred meaning, negotiate it, or oppose it. This matters because it gives us a model of mass communication that makes more sense in diverse society. It draws attention to the fact that media messages are not simply sent and received. They are produced within institutions that are implicitly shaped by ideologies, then circulated through media systems that are fueled by ideologies, and interpreted by audiences who filter those messages through their own ideologies. By the end of the third epoch, the world of communication looks radically different, as societies become inundated with information and messages and saturated by the technologies that transmit them. Communication went from being a local interpersonal group phenomenon to a mass industrial system. By 1980, the next transformation had already been arriving. Computers were becoming more personal, satellites were making communication more global, cable television was fragmenting and converging mass audiences in unpredictable ways. Video recording and editing technologies were giving viewers more control. Digital networks were beginning to connect machines, institutions, and ordinary people. Indeed, the third epoch ends with tension and anticipation, making way for the next, which will begin to break those mass publics apart and reconfigure them in even more complex ways. Thanks for listening.